It's a disappointment for conservatives who for 2 years had thought they were going to have a majority government. But things are very much fluid, and it wouldn't surprise me if Canada has another election within a year. I don't think Mark Carney would have won were it not for Trump's tweets. And I know that sounds incredible, but I think it's true.
Now, Canada has just had a major election. Can you describe what happened? What is the results? Who has won the election?
Sure. For the last 2 years, the Conservative Party of Canada and its leader, Pierre Poilievre, have dominated the polls. But that all changed a couple months ago, and everything flipped. Justin Trudeau was pretty much pushed out. And in his place, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, former World Economic Forum director, former net zero ambassador, he was installed as the prime minister. I say that because he didn't win any election. It was an internal party process that had a lot of question marks over it. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Children as young as 14 were allowed to vote. Non-citizens were allowed to vote. 400,000 people were registered to vote, but 250,000 of them were disqualified. It was the most scandalous, obviously, questionable selection process, but no questions asked. He was wafted up to become prime minister. And Canadians knew almost nothing about him. He has 3 passports. He's lived in the UK for a decade. He didn't know basic Canadian things. It was clear he had just arrived. But he called a snap election, and he actually managed to triumph. He edged out Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre did exceedingly well for a conservative. He had the highest vote of any conservative leader in nearly 40 years. The trouble is, Canada has a multi-party system, and there's typically 2 parties on the left. There's the Liberal Party in the center left, and the NDP, the Socialist Party, on the hard left. The NDP pretty much euthanized itself. So did the Green Party. Example, the Green Party canceled 100 candidates at the last moment so as not to split the vote. So there was some sort of compact or collusion amongst all the left of center parties in Canada. So even though Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, got the best results in a generation for the Conservatives, the Unite the Left movement behind the globalist Mark Carney edged him out by a couple of percent. Mark Carney does not have a majority, but he'll probably be able to fashion a working coalition with the rump of the Socialist NDP or even the Quebec separatists, who have some seats too. So long and short of it is, it's a disappointment for conservatives who for 2 years had thought they were going to have a majority government. It's a success for the Liberals in that they won. But things are very much fluid, and it wouldn't surprise me if Canada has another election within a year. The big factor I haven't talked about yet, which I'm happy to with you, is Donald Trump and his challenge to Canada, which I think supercharged Mark Carney. I don't think Mark Carney would have won were it not for Trump's tweets. And I know that sounds incredible, but I think it's true.
So Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, as you said, he's been leading in the polls for years. You know, at one point I think he had a 25-point lead over Trudeau. And then obviously Trudeau drops out, Carney comes in, and Trump basically starts tweeting about the 51st state, threatening Canada with all sorts of tariffs. And what seems bizarre to me is that Canada faces so many issues, from housing crisis to inflation, record levels of immigration, and Trudeau was seemingly so unpopular for his policies on, you know, the COVID lockdown and all sorts of other areas. And despite all of these mainstream, you know, things that are hitting your wallet in Canada, Trump's tweets, why has Trump's tweets caused such a kind of reversal in the Liberal Party's fortunes?
There's a few things. First of all, just by removing Justin Trudeau, the Liberal Party would jump, because over 10 years, a politician, you know, they say friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. And over 10 years, people had their own reasons for disliking Trudeau personally. So remove him, and any leader of the Liberals is going to get a bump. So that was part of it, but there is an anti-American strain to Canada. I mean, think about the American Revolution. George Washington won, but where did the colonists who were loyal to the king go? They were called United Empire Loyalists, and they moved up to Canada in great numbers. So there was always a little bit of an anti-American streak to Canada, in part stretching back to that great Revolutionary War. Canada is center-left, I think. The media is far-left. So there's a lot of Trump derangement syndrome in Canada, even worse, I think, than in the United Kingdom. And so you have a few things working together. You had removing Trudeau, which was a real obstacle for people liking the Liberals. You had Trump personally, who was disliked by many Canadians just by simply of endless anti-Trump propaganda. You had that underlying anti-Americanism. But when Trump says, we want you as the 51st state, there was sort of an edge there of we will make this happen. The same way he talked to Denmark about Greenland, the same way he talked to Panama about the Panama Canal, and Gaza about the future there. It felt like it was more a command than an invitation. And by the way, Canada is not necessarily a completely happy country. You may know that the province of Quebec has twice had a referendum to separate, and in the last time, it came within 0.5% of succeeding. So the Canadian Supreme Court and the Canadian Parliament hammered out a path to succession. In the United States, it's illegal to secede. Sorry, to secession, not succession, excuse me. The Civil War in the United States was to stop the South from seceding. In Canada, it's perfectly legal. You simply have to have a clear question and a clear win on a clear question in a referendum, and you're done. So Quebec has always kept that as an option, and recently Western Canada has felt that they were hard done by. There was sort of an antipathy towards Western Canada and the resource economy there. So there were parts of Canada that would be open to an invitation to, let's say, commit political adultery, because that's sort of what Trump did. When you say to someone in a country, hey, why don't you come and join us? You're basically saying end your current relationship, end your status, end your history, your culture, your place, change your story, and mesh it with ours. I'm going to use the adultery analogy just for one more minute. Let's say there's a husband and a wife who are very unhappy together, and one or both parties are considering a divorce. If someone comes along with a very strong proposition and says, hey, come marry me, it might actually be a good outcome for that first couple. But if you're in a happy marriage and some guy comes up and says, hey, babe, come with me, it sounds like an indecent proposal. So some Canadians did indeed respond positively to Trump saying, come be the 51st state. Albertans, young people who can't get ahead, people who are pro-American, they said, oh, that would be cool if we were part of the United States, stronger economy. But for a lot of Canadians, it was like an indecent proposal, like that movie from the 90s with Woody Harrelson and Demi Moore, where the older man offered $1 million to sleep with his wife. I know I'm talking a lot about infidelity here, but that's sort of how it felt. That's the emotional button that was pushed in a lot of Canadians when Trump said, hey, come with us and we'll cherish you. And if you're in a happy marriage, that kind of a come on is not just a turnoff, it emotionally hurts you. You're sort of outraged by it. There were a number of Canadians for whom they were outraged by that, and they didn't need a lot to be shoved away from Pierre Poilievre, who is quite a conservative guy. So here comes Mark Carney, who on paper looks prime ministerial, former Bank of Canada governor. He looks good in a suit. He sounds statesmanlike. He's not hated yet like Trudeau. And then Trump is pushing people away from Poilievre towards Carney. And it was a perfect storm. And the thing about Pierre Poilievre, the conservative leader, is he had a few mildly Trump-like qualities. He was tough with the media. He had sort of a conservative populism, sort of a working-class conservative approach. There were a number of things he did that the left and their media allies said, oh, you're a mini-Trump. You are a poodle for Trump. These characteristics that you've shown over the past 2 years that we liked, we're now going to rebrand them as you're disloyal to our country. So the conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, was in a bit of a pickle. And there's no way he could outbid Mark Carney in anti-Americanism, because that's not a natural position for a conservative to take. So I believe that Trump, either by accident or as part of some stratagem that I don't quite understand, wobbled the Canadian race. And like I say, Pierre Poilievre, the conservative, had the best showing of any conservative in a generation. But the Unite the Left, combined with sort of the sensitivities of proposing a national divorce, managed to eke out a win for the Liberals. Not a huge win, not a majority. And by the way, I'm the biggest pro-Trump guy you'll ever meet. And this is tough because I like Trump, and I think his tough style is needed for America to deal with the threats in the world. But Canada is not actually a threat to the United States. Canada's best buddies. We have a trade agreement negotiated by Trump himself. I agree with Trump that Canada needs to strengthen its military and remove some genuine trade barriers like our tariffs on dairy and things like that. But I think in general, Canada's sort of like Batman and Robin. America's Batman, we're Robin. And when Batman gives Robin a noogie again and again and again, I think it disoriented a number of Canadians. That will fade away. That will resolve itself in the next year. The Trump challenge will be resolved one way or another over the next year. And I think Mark Carney will reveal that he is a socialist, environmentalist, globalist. And I think it'll be evident that he just has put a new coat of paint over the same rotting Liberal Party. Most of the MPs are the same. Most of his cabinet is the same. Most of his policies are the same. So people will say, oh, I thought we had a change. It's just the same old thing. And I think Pierre Poilievre's new coalition of young people and working class conservatives will endure. So I'm not as depressed this morning as I thought I might be. I just think we have to wait another year to get that conservative victory that we thought was coming.
The last point you made is interesting. So in the UK, the majority of people who vote for the Conservative Party are older people, pensioners, people concerned particularly about their state benefits and so on. But in Canada, it's younger people voting for the Conservatives. And if you look at some of the opinion polls as to what the Canadian voters' priorities were in this election, other than the economy, the second one was who's going to deal with Donald Trump better. And it's by far it was voters older than 60 who were most concerned about Donald Trump. So was this really the election of, the old voting against the young?
Well, there was a few things going on there. I remember about a year ago seeing a YouGov poll when Rishi Sunak was the British leader. And I don't remember the exact age, but it was the youngest cohort, maybe 18 to 24 or something. And I almost couldn't believe it. I thought it was a rogue poll. This YouGov poll, if I'm recalling correctly, said that only 1% of young Brits intended to vote for Sunak's Conservatives. And I almost couldn't believe that. When was the last time you've seen a number like that? Whereas Pierre Poilievre, for 2 years, has been the strong favorite of young people in that same demographic group. I've never seen it in my life either, but I can explain it pretty easily. You can't buy a house in Canada if you're not a millionaire. So the idea of go to college or go to university or get a trade and then buy a home and start a family in your 20s and 30s, that doesn't happen in Canada anymore. The average house price in my city of Toronto is over $1 million. Same in Vancouver. No one can afford that on a regular job unless you have a lot of help from your family. So you're a young person, and you see the Liberals, either Trudeau or Carney, talking about more taxes and more regulation and just strangling things. Oh, and by the way, immigration numbers that would shock even the UK. And what does that do? That drives down wages, makes it hard for young people to get a good paying job, and drives up housing. Same as in the UK. I think it's even worse here than in the UK. So, by the way, young people were the most open to Trump's amorous advances for, I think, the same reason. They just said, we're not getting ahead here in Canada. Canada has been in a recession for most of the Trudeau years on a per capita basis. Let me explain what I mean by that. The average Canadian is losing ground year after year economically but it has been masked by bringing in millions of foreign migrants every year to juice the gross GDP number. So Canada's economy is growing very slowly, but it's only because you're bringing in millions and millions of people. Of course, the GDP is going to creep up, but on a per capita basis, we're all getting poorer. And even if people don't know the technical language for that, they feel it. And by the way, mass immigration has other issues too. It has cultural issues. We see pro-Hamas marches in Canada, just like you have in London and other places. You see Palestinian flags and even terrorist flags waving in Canada with impunity. And people know that as part of the liberal bundle of issues. So young people are worried that they don't have the same future. But if you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're 75, you've paid off your house, if anything, you like increasing home prices because you just pocket the upside in your home value. You don't really care about taxes anymore because you're not working. You know, you can focus on luxury issues like, I don't like what Trump said today. You can make, and maybe you're even reading the New York Times because you're such a fancy Canadian. You want to show how classy you are, so you read a foreign newspaper. So you're getting this anti-Trump narrative. You don't care about employment because you're retired. You don't care about taxes because you're on a, you don't have a significant income. So yeah, being anti-Trump is a luxury good. Buying a house, getting a job is a basic need. That's the divide. And I say again, it was really close. It was like, I don't know the exact stats off the top of my head, it was like 41% to 43%. It was quite close. And it was only because the parties on the left absolutely tanked themselves on purpose. It was not an accidental or coincidental thing. There was absolutely collusion. As I mentioned before, the Green Party literally withdrew dozens of candidates, I think actually close to 100 all in, just to avoid splitting the vote for Mark Carney. It was a really strange collusion.
Let's talk a bit about the right. Does Pierre Poilievre resign after this defeat? And what happened to the People's Party? That's Canada's version of the Reform Party, the kind of more populist party on the right.
Right. So two questions there. Pierre Poilievre actually lost his own district, which is a surprise because that was quite a safe conservative seat. I think since Canada was born 160 or whatever years ago, I think it's gone conservative every election except for once. So it was a surprise, but that's happened before, and I don't think that and the result are not enough to convince conservatives on the ground that Poilievre isn't the man. Like I say, he had the best result in a generation. There's no one on the horizon that's better than him. The Conservative Party has had two losers before. They're going to give Poilievre another chance. I have literally not heard a single genuine conservative say he's got to go. He's not going to go. It's a hassle that he's not in Parliament, but he'll fix that somehow. As to the People's Party of Canada, I dispute the comparison with Nigel Farage's Reform UK, and here's why. Nigel Farage is a winner. I know that sounds odd because he has a tiny little caucus, but he won Brexit through relentless campaigning. And then he won again on the debanking issue, if you recall, when he was debanked by Coutts, and he fought back quite bravely, I think. And he's frenetic and energetic. He's constantly reinventing himself. I think this is his third party in a decade or something. But like any politician, he's a little bit tricky. But I think he knows how to win. And there's a by-election in Frodsham next week. I think he's going to win that one. That's an old Labour seat. The leader of the People's Party of Canada, who I've known for decades, I even consider him a friend. I like him. But I'm so sorry, and I say this not as an insult, but as an observation. He's a loser. I think last night was his fifth or sixth loss in a row. And I know Brits are saying, well, Nigel lost 6 times before he won. The People's Party of Canada shrunk down to 0.7% last night. It was nowhere. They, too, didn't run a full slate of candidates, not for any strategic reason. They just couldn't get their act together. The only thing the People's Party achieved last night was in a couple of ridings, probably denying the Conservatives a win. Maxime Bernier, the leader of this party, is, I think, tantamount to a pundit. I don't think he's a genuine political actor, and I say this as someone who's admired him on a personal level for 30 years. The People's Party of Canada will be 1% or less until it's shut down. It's just a fact. And I think the voters showed that. The last poll I saw showed that 3% were going to support the People's Party. On election day, the real number was 0.7%, because I guess they were saying something to the pollster to sound brave and, individualistic. But on election day, they voted for. There was only two possible winners last night: Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative, or Mark Carney, the Liberal. And 3/4 of PPC voters decided to vote in a meaningful way rather than a symbolic way. I do not believe there's any future for Maxime Bernier other than that as a pundit.